Let's jump right into this. Today, we're unpacking the anatomy of a totally preventable disaster, the sinking of the Prestige oil tanker. We're going to explore exactly how a completely manageable maritime emergency somehow devolved into a historic tragedy of errors. It's a legacy that honestly still haunts international courts and coastal communities even today.
63,000. That is the staggering amount in tons of toxic heavy fuel oil that was violently dumped onto European coastlines. Just to put that into perspective for you, this massive release of persistent sludge actually dwarfed the infamous Exxon Valdez spill in sheer volume, and to make matters worse, it carried an even higher level of toxicity.
Okay, let's dive into this. You've got to ask yourself, who is really to blame for Spain's worst ecological disaster? Was this just an unavoidable act of nature, like, a freak storm overwhelming a vessel? Or, and this is what the evidence strongly suggests, was this a catastrophe driven by political cowardice and a complete, absolute disregard for salvage engineering?
Section 1. The sinking in 2002.
To really understand what happened here, we have to look at the ship's rapid 6-day deterioration. It started on November 13th. This 26-year-old single-hulled tanker, which was already structurally deficient by the way, suffered a starboard hull breach off the coast of Galicia during a fierce winter storm. But here's the thing, the ship didn't sink immediately. Instead, by November 15th, the vessel was forced into a tow heading south, right out into the treacherous open ocean. Finally, on November 19th, after days of battling extreme stress from the waves, the vessel literally split right in half and sank to the bottom of the Atlantic. What should have been a localized leak turned into a catastrophic deep-sea collapse.
Section 2. The Port of Refuge Crisis. So why on earth was a leaking, damaged ship towed out into a severe storm? Well, it essentially comes down to a massive clash of priorities. Captain Mangoras made a desperate but totally logical salvage request: bring the leaking ship into a sheltered port or a coastal inlet. That way, the spill could actually be contained with booms. But the governments of Spain, France, and Portugal, they were operating on this out-of-sight, out-of-mind political strategy. Terrified of public backlash over localized contamination, they ordered the listing ship to be towed away from their shores and straight into severe weather.
And the consequence of that specific decision was absolutely devastating. A localized spill was instantly transformed into 2,300 kilometers of polluted coastline, forcing a structurally weakened vessel to navigate high seas in a winter storm. It subjected the hull to bending forces that essentially guaranteed its destruction. The sheer scale of this epic policy failure was so bad it later prompted the EU to mandate ports of refuge in the Erika III directive, basically ensuring that technical salvage assessments absolutely have to take precedence over political optics in future emergencies.
Section 3. Toxic tides and human health.
Now, what's really interesting and tragic about this is the hidden human cost. For the coastlines of Spain, Portugal, and France, the visible damage was already done. But because the governmental response was so delayed, over 300,000 volunteers had to step up to clean this toxic sludge by hand. A study by the Instituto de Salud Carlos III looked at the long-term health of those highly exposed workers. Compared to a non-exposed baseline, cleanup workers showed an 8% increased risk for lower respiratory symptoms. And get this, a shocking 27.4% increased risk for structural chromosomal alterations. These volunteers suffered undeniable unseen genotoxic damage just from breathing in the toxic volatile organic compounds in the oil.
And the environmental toll? Equally heartbreaking. The spilled cargo was Russian M100 heavy fuel oil. This stuff is highly resistant to natural weathering. We're talking an estimated 300,000 seabirds killed. It forced a 6-month offshore fishing ban that completely crippled local fishing communities. And because of the heavy, super stable chemical compounds in the fuel, it caused persistent toxic bioaccumulation in marine life, poisoning the local food web for years and years.
Section 4. Nunca Máis grassroots protest.
As you can imagine, this combination of sheer ecological devastation and just mind-boggling government incompetence sparked a massive socio-political reaction. A broad coalition of Galician citizens, environmentalists, and artists founded the Nunca Máis, or Never Again movement. To process their collective trauma and demand real political accountability, they actually took the official Galician civil flag and modified it. They turned the traditional white background into a solid black tide to symbolize the oil spill. It was a really powerful act of green nationalism.
This whole movement resulted in a brilliant cultural outpour of grief and protest.
Design collectives and graphic guerrillas created this rich visual imagery of intervention, and this art literally mobilized hundreds of thousands of people. In fact, during the famous Umbrella protest on December 1st, 2002, over 200,000 demonstrators marched through the pouring rain in Santiago de Compostela to protest the disastrous handling of the event.
But you have to remember, this art was always deeply connected to a grueling physical reality, the thick, persistent chapapote, or oil sludge that kept washing ashore. The Nunca Máis movement wasn't just about cleaning up the beaches. These protesters fought back against what they identified as patriarchal and capitalist divisions. They strongly believed those systems prioritize political image and profit way above the eco-social survival of their own communities.
Section 5. Scapegoating Captain Mangueiras. So despite the massive public outcry pointing the finger right at political decisions, the authorities really needed a fall guy, and they put a price on him. 3,000 million euros. That was the totally unprecedented, exorbitant bail set for the 67-year-old Captain Mangueiras when he was arrested. The investigating judge set a figure that literally had zero relation to the captain's personal assets. He was thrown into a high-security facility for 83 days until the ship's insurers finally paid the bail. Human rights judges later called this a really dangerous precedent that basically rendered the right to liberty illusory.
The maritime industry was understandably absolutely outraged. The organization Intertanko stated, faced with Spain's refusal to give the ship refuge, Cap Mangueiras courageously did everything he could to save his crew and his ship. He bravely stayed on board to secure tow lines under extreme danger. A flag state investigation even called his actions exemplary. Yet this guy faced 14 years of judicial harassment for decisions that were quite literally forced upon him by political authorities.
The scale of the resulting legal battle was just immense. The criminal trial finally started in A Coruña in 2012, a full 10 years after the disaster. It involved 1,500 claimants across 55 civil parties, generated 300,000 pages of legal documents, and they called upon 133 witnesses and 100 experts. Crazy, right? Well, initially, the provincial court actually cleared Mangueiras of environmental crimes, finding he simply fulfilled his professional duty.
Section 6. The prestigious lingering legacy.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because the final legal outcomes of this disaster are still rippling through the courts today. In 2016, the Spanish Supreme Court unexpectedly overturned the lower court's acquittal, convicting the captain of gross negligence. By applying this fault-based liability conviction, the court effectively stripped the shipowner of their liability limits. This unlocked a massive $1 billion insurance liability. And that decision sparked ongoing, highly complex post-Brexit legal battles over the London P&I Club's insurance payout, shifting the whole conflict away from the ocean and right into international arbitration courts.
Which leaves us with a really provocative final thought. We changed the laws for ships, but have we actually changed the laws of accountability? The Prestige disaster catalyzed the mandate for safe ports of refuge, and that fundamentally improved maritime law for sure. But as these massive legal battles wage on over insurance payouts, and the cleanup volunteers continue to live with permanent chromosomal damage, it challenges us to reflect, was true justice ever really served for the coastlines of Galicia? Thanks so much for joining me to explore this complex explainer. Catch you in the next one.